Have you seen Star Wars?
So this past week, I have completed a lifelong childhood dream of mine, and that is seeing one of the original Star Wars films in theaters, and that was Empire Strikes Back. Arguably, and I would even say arguably, it's just, in my opinion, a fact that it is the best Star Wars film ever made. Directed by Irvin Kershner, produced by my boy Gary Kurtz, story by George Lucas and Lawrence Kasdan, Leah Brackett. Amazing film. And this, like I said, was something I've always wanted to do since I was a kid. And last week, my girlfriend really surprised me and said, hey, I got us tickets to go see Empire Strikes Back on Thursday. And it was a mostly empty theater because of COVID-19 and everything. It was just one of those rare opportunities where they're actually showing the movie in theaters where you can go see it. Because normally, when you try to go see one of the original Star Wars films, it's when they do a marathon for like Rise of Skywalker, The Last Jedi, or The Force Awakens. They would do marathons of all the films right before the new film came out. And I finally just got to see this one on its own. And I have to say, it was fantastic. It was an amazing experience. And seeing these films at home are something special because, you know, you sit down, you relax, and sometimes with me, with the original trilogy and even the prequel films, they kind of put me to sleep in not a bad way of like, oh, they're that boring, but because, you know, you're so familiar with them and you've seen them so many times, it's just kind of like when you read a book to a kid and it's the same book they've always heard, but they fall asleep halfway through it instead of at the end because it's that comfort of knowing what's going to happen. This was different. I, of course, did not fall asleep in this film, but just sitting down with a bucket of popcorn and seeing the film in 4K. I mean, this was, of course, the altered versions, the special edition, and there were, of course, some scenes where I looked at it and I'm like, oh, George, why'd you change it, buddy? But still, what I love about this film is that I feel like it has aged extremely well. Even people in the audience, and like I said, it was a very small audience, laughed at some of the things that Han Solo said, and there was still that emotion that you had when Han Solo tells Leia, I know, and seeing Luke react to Vader saying that he is his father. That scene truly is beautiful. And one of the things I think this film does a lot better than some of the other Star Wars films, if not all of the Star Wars films, is kind of show a simple story. The simplicity to it of the first 20 to 30 minutes of the film is set on the planet of Hoth, and it's kind of just establishing where our characters are at. When you look at a lot of the other middle films of the saga, like Attack of the Clones and The Last Jedi, mainly with like The Last Jedi, it just kind of goes straight back into what we did with The Force Awakens. Like, there's not a beat that was missed after The Force Awakens. The First Order's right on top of the Rebellion or the Resistance, whatever you want to call them again. This one takes some time to really show where our characters are at. Han Solo's not really wanting to stay around with the Rebellion because he's still being hunted down by Jabba, and that comes into play a little bit later with Boba capturing him and taking him to Jabba, so we know kind of what to expect with Episode 6. Luke is still kind of learning the ways of the Force. He still wants to become a Jedi, but after losing Ben, he doesn't really know where to go, and so Ben's Force Ghost comes up. Leia is kind of taking on her new role as, instead of being the Princess of Alderaan, she is now a really big general over there for the Rebellion. And what I like about it is that the Empire sends down a probe droid, and that is kind of like the first shot of the movie. It's the first scene of them sending down that probe droid, and then after the Rebellion finds out about it, then the Empire actually comes in. But that first 20 to 30 minutes of them being on Hoth really just establishes where the Rebellion's at, and the second they find out the Empire knows where they're at, they don't say, alright, well, let's wait until they get here and try to fight them back or anything. They're like, alright, well, now we gotta pack up our stuff and go. And then when they leave, it's unique to see Han and Leia and Chewie and C-3PO, they're all together, and they're having to run away from the Empire and really deal with the fact that the Rebellion kind of isn't too involved. This movie's really about our main characters, Han, Luke, and Leia, and we actually get to explore a little bit more about them. And I love the life lessons that we get with Yoda and Luke, and that's something that has really been lost on most of the Star Wars films that have come out since this film, and probably even since Return of the Jedi. Because even with the prequels, some of the lessons Yoda teaches, like anger leads to hate and hate leads to suffering, words that can easily be interchanged and kind of mean the same thing, and then the talk about do not miss those who have passed on, rejoice, and all that stuff. Some of it has a little bit of lessons to it, but not a lot, at least compared to Empire Strikes Back, where he says, do or do not, there is no try, and judge me by my size, do you, and all that stuff. He's kind of giving Luke a lot of these answers that the audience has, which is something I think hasn't really been done or tried, at least until The Last Jedi, even though I don't like the lessons that were taught in The Last Jedi, even the part with Yoda saying that the greatest teacher failure is. It's like, well, I mean, that's kind of true to a point, but there's a lot of failures in the universe that we know, at least here on Earth, and I don't really go to them for the life advice. I'd probably go to the guy who's actually succeeded in his life. So saying failure is the greatest teacher of them all, it's kind of like, well, that's true to a point, as long as you eventually succeed, and if you don't, then you're just a failure, so why would I go to you for advice? Yeah, I don't want to go on a rant about The Last Jedi, but my point here is that Yoda tells Luke a lot of the answers to the questions that we as an audience have been asking of, is the dark side stronger? And Luke just kind of asking questions about the Force that we wanted to know, at least when it came to A New Hope. And I really love that about Empire, is that apparently Luke asked something like, over the course of the original trilogy, 118 questions or something like that. I'm pulling that number out of thin air, but I remember it being over 100 questions that Luke asked, and we get a lot of those answers in this. And it's amazing to see how dedicated someone like Luke is to his friends in this, where he's willing to kind of give up on training to go save them. And it reminds me a little bit, because Avatar: The Last Airbender has become really popular since it came back on Netflix, where, Avatar, Aang, he goes and he trains with that monk and the clouds or whatever, and there comes that point where he realizes if he really wants to become the Avatar, he has to give up on his the girl he likes, Katara, and he doesn't. He prevents himself from fully doing it because he's in love with her. And it's kind of how I relate to Luke, where he doesn't know if his friends are going to die or not in Empire Strikes Back. So he is willing to give up on his training, but make that promise that he will come back and finish it, and he's willing to go face Vader and kind of face death in a sense in order to save his friends. And even when he finds out that Vader is his father, he doesn't join him. Right then and there, he backs away, and when he falls off that kind of, I would call it a cliff, but he falls off that little beacon or whatever in Cloud City because he would rather die than join Vader. And I think that just simple things like that really show a lot of power and emotion in those scenes, and also how beautiful the film looks. One thing that I know Lucas was not a fan of, that Irvin Kershner did, the director of this film, was Irvin Kershner was into those master shots. He really wanted to establish the whole setting, and Lucas was one of those guys where he's like, hey, just get to the point. I just want to see of where my character's at, and do an A and B shot of dialogue and everything. Irvin Kershner's not the same. And what was unique about this film is that when it came to the original trilogy, this was the film George Lucas was the least involved with. This was the film that he had to do a lot of producing because of the financial situation of Lucasfilm and Star Wars, where the bank actually, and this is where Charles Weber, the first Lucasfilm president, really became an integral role for this film, is that the bank that gave out the loan for Empire Strikes Back was, I think they were actually getting upset that they were going over budget, because that's one thing Gary Kurtz was allowing Irvin Kershner to do, was just do what he needed to do to make the film he wanted, no matter the cost. And that upset Lucas, and that upset the bank a little bit. So what happened was the bank was like, hey, we have a new guy in charge, we don't care what you're doing with this film, you owe us X amount of dollars. And Charles Weber, the president of Lucasfilm at that time, had to come in and kind of save the day and make a deal with the bank and renegotiate or something, and that completely saved the film. And also another thing that saved the film was the toy sales. If the toy sales for Star Wars after A New Hope did not do as well as they did, they would not have made the money that needed to be made to produce this film. So there's a lot of interesting history with Empire Strikes Back, and it's very interesting to see this kind of Star Wars film use collaboration with Lucas, George Lucas himself, with someone like Leah Brackett, who unfortunately passed away before she was able to finish her script. So then he brings in Lawrence Kasdan, who also disagreed with Lucas on a lot of story options. So you have Lucas writing the story, and Lawrence Kasdan kind of writing the dialogue, doing the screenplay for it, and then Irvin Kershner filming it and doing changes that he wanted to do, like the scene where Leia says, I love you, and Han says, I know. It was originally going to be, I love you too, but Irvin says, that just doesn't sound like something Han would say. And then you use what someone like Harrison Ford, the actor, use their creativity, where you just tell Han, or you tell Harrison at this point, hey, just say what you think you need to say. And Harrison Ford says, as Han Solo, I know. And it just became such an iconic scene that we still remember to this day. And Empire Strikes Back, in my opinion, is the greatest sequel of all time. It really shows you how sequels are supposed to be done, and Star Wars has had this history of trying to kind of replicate that again, of the middle film in a trilogy is supposed to be the darker one. But what's interesting about this one is that it ends with a little bit of hope. It ends with hope that we're actually going to have a better resolution at the end of Return of the Jedi, and of course we did. But I just think this film is inarguably the greatest Star Wars film of all time, and seeing it in theaters just brought the inner kid out of me, man. I used to watch this film on VHS all the time. I still do, look up to Luke as my favorite character of all time, mainly when it comes to Star Wars, because he is that innocent child in all of us where we really just want to go explore the galaxy and we want to go find our destiny. And Yoda kind of even criticizes us as an audience and Luke as a character in that scene where he says, you know, I've watched this guy for a long time and he was always looking to the future and what lies beyond, but never on where he was and what he was doing. And I feel like those small dialogue exchanges, while it may not be important to a lot of us, when you look back at it and you really think about it, there's a lot of life lessons in that I don't think we've gotten in Star Wars in many, many years. And I hope one day we can get a Star Wars film that could potentially be better than Empire Strikes Back, because to this day we have not. And that's good in some sense, because that just means that sometimes you just get the perfect film at the perfect time. You know, 1980, what a great year to be a Star Wars fan. But man, this was just such an amazing film. If you have the opportunity to go see a movie in theaters and Empire Strikes Back is playing at one of your local theaters, could not recommend it more, man. This was a fantastic experience for me as a Star Wars fan. I could not be more grateful that I got to go do this, and I hope one day I get to see A New Hope and Return of the Jedi in theaters, because Empire Strikes Back is still the best Star Wars film of all time for me. It's not my favorite. I think it's my second favorite, because Return of the Jedi has always been my favorite because I like seeing Luke as a full-fledged Jedi. But after seeing this in theaters, it went up for me, man. Like it went up on the scale of like, this may now be my favorite Star Wars film ever. So tell me your thoughts below, guys. Have you ever seen Empire Strikes Back in theaters? And if you have, what were your thoughts? And what do you think about it potentially being, if not already being, the best Star Wars film of all time? Thank you all for watching. I'm Star Wars Only. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. I will see you all next time, and may the Force be with you always.